Hello everybody, it's Claire here from Sewing by Claire, and today I've got a little bit of a bonus video for you. Well, I hope you think it's going to be a bonus anyway. You'll know from the videos on my channel that we've recently completed our advent calendar, and that I said that I would be rolling mine up in order to store it and pass it on, so that it's kind of quite easy to store in this way. The dowels obviously are keeping that rigid, but I kind of got to thinking and I thought maybe it would be nice if we've got enough fabric left over to make like a cover for it, just for putting it into, so that when it is stored it's in its own little tie top bag, and that would be quite nice to keep. So I had a little look at my fabric and voila, I think that we will have enough fabric. So I thought that I'd bring you along with me just in case you fancy making one for your advent calendar as well. And I just thought it'd be just a nice way to store it. I'll pop on in a second and just show you what it's like when it's finished, and then you don't have to go all the way through the video if you don't like what I've done. Obviously it'll save you that time and effort, won't it? The other thing I just wanted to say was welcome to all of my new subscribers. I've had quite a few just recently, so I hope you're enjoying the content. There's quite a lot of diverse content, so have a good old look around my channel and see what you enjoy doing, and if there's anything else that I can inspire you to have a go at. For those that are returning, you know the way that I try to do things anyway. Try not to waffle too much, which isn't always that easy, but hopefully inspire you to have a go at making things for yourself, and tips and tricks just to elevate your finishes so that they really look beautiful, and they're definitely something that you're proud of and proud to use yourself and proud to gift away if that's what you're wanting to do. So let's get on and make this cover. So just popped on just to show you what we've made. So we have made a drawstring bag with a label for the calendar, and it's got a boxed end to it as well, which is straight, honestly, you have to believe me, just for keeping our calendar all nice and neat and all together. So I'll stop waffling and I'll let you get on with the sewing. So here it is. So the first thing that we need to do really is have some kind of idea in our head as to what we want to make. And what I've decided that I want to make is like a drawstring top. So it's to be a bit like a drawstring bottle bag, I suppose, really. And so that's what I'm going to make. And what I want is I want this advent calendar to sit in the middle like this, but I want enough that I can box off the corners to make it allow room for this bulk at the end here. But we also need it to be long enough this end, so I'm comfortable that this piece of fabric along this length is fine. And then I've got another piece of fabric here which is from the strange shape that we had to make, but if I put that over the top it's pretty much the same size. So I think between these two, by the time I've joined those together and used up my seam allowance, I think that'll be a nice shape for that. So this, just to recap, this is the fabric that was left over from the backing of my advent calendar. I purchased a 1 metre piece, and I believe it was 112 centimetres wide. So this has just given us this extra bit here that's sort of kind of like a bit of an L shape. Well, it is an L shape, isn't it? Where I cut out the backing, I've cut out some binding, the bit that goes around here, and we cut out the doweling pocket, and we cut out the straps as well. So actually I think that's a really cost-effective use. So in order to get this second piece as long as possible, because we want that to go along as well, the top of the fabric, if I cut that across at a straight angle there, I think that's going to be great. So let's just pop this down onto our, I'm going to say chopping board, cutting board, that's the word I wanted. Get a rotary cutter and a ruler. I've only got my really long one. Oh no, I haven't. I've got the other one up here. Craft rooms do get in such a mess sometimes, don't they? And so we want to make this piece as long as possible. So I'm just going to go up here to where this piece joins. Literally going to just carry that line straight across towards the edge. It's not quite perfectly straight, but just for me to get roughly the right kind of direction will be fine. And what I'll do in a second is we'll measure this, and then we'll know exactly how long this is. So this has given me roughly 2 pieces that are just slightly shorter than each other, so not much, but if I put that on top, even the shorter piece, allowing for boxing in and hemming, should be fine. So we'll work with this shorter piece as being our length. So let me measure that for you, and then you'll be able to measure that against your advent calendar and see where you are. So my rolled advent calendar is 21 inches long, which is about 53 centimetres. And if we measure across the widest part here, across the end when it's rolled up, it's 4.5 inches, which is about 11.5 centimetres. So that's what I'm working with in order to cover. Now if we look at the piece of fabric that we've got here, let me measure this now. It's still got the selvage edge on, and I'm going to take that selvage edge off. So let me do that first perhaps, because we don't want to sew with the selvage edge. So the selvage edge, just to recap, is this bound edge. It looks a little bit furry on the end, but if you look at it, that's bound and that's not going to fray any further. It's just the end of the roll when the fabric is loaded onto the rollers for printing, then it has a bound edge at this side and it has a bound edge on the other side as well. I've not got the other one there because that's been cut off already. But we don't sew with that because it tends to, when it's washed, it tends to behave slightly differently and it can constrict a little bit more than your general fabric can. So in this case, we're going to take that off and not sew with that. You can save selvages. If you go onto Pinterest, there's other different selvage edge projects you can use. You can use them for making pincushions and that kind of thing. So in this case, I'm just going to fold it over itself and then turn our fabric round so the ruler covers the fabric that we want to use, because then that protects it. Make sure that's as straight as we can get it. I'm just going to take it off with my rotary cutter. If you've not got a rotary cutter, they are great, but if you've not got one, don't worry. Just mark an edge with a pencil or a marking pen or chalk tool, and then you can then just snip it off with your scissors. So don't worry, you don't have to nip out and get anything special. So that's taking that selvage edge off for us. Open this out again. And this is going to make one side of our bag, so it's only one half of it. So we're going to end up with two pieces in the end. And how long is this? This is 29 inches long, which is 74 centimetres. And it's 9 inches wide, which is 23 centimetres. So what I want to do now is just get my second piece here. That has got a selvage edge on the end there, but I'm going to cut that off anyway. So I'm just going to put the two pieces on top of each other and see how those compare, because we want two pieces and we usually have them equal. And look at that, they're going to just pretty much match for me. So this was obviously a project that was meant to be, because everything's just matching up really nicely. So I'm just laying those two on top, putting one on top of the other so that you can see the difference between them, and just a smidge to cut off on either side and a bit off the end. So let me just go ahead and do that, just to neaten these up and make them equal. You also might find it easier standing up to do your rotary cutting as well. So we always cut, let's turn it this way, we always cover over the fabric that we want. And if we use that straight edge at the bottom there, and try and take off the bare minimum. Just roll this up. So this is just literally all I'm doing is squaring up the fabric and trying to make it so that it's equal on all the sides, because that will give us a nicer finish when this is put together. So you can see just smallish scraps just coming off, but it just edges that up just nicely. Keeping that edge nice and straight. Make sure I don't move it too much. If your fabric's very crinkled, then I would suggest you take it to the ironing board and just iron it as well, because that will also give you will just tidy it all up and make a nice result. So I'm going to start off down the bottom down here, because which way am I going to cut it? This way, I think, because I actually want to use it from this bottom edge to make it the right length. And that's where we're going to be. So let's just move that along. And I think it's actually working out at 8 3/4 of an inch that this is being cut at the moment. squaring up sometimes can be one of those jobs. If we're not careful, we end up taking off more and more, don't we, each time we make a pass with the rotary cutter. So just choose an amount that you're comfortable with to make it equal. But just make sure that you're not taking off so much that you then compromise the width of your finished roll. And different panels finish at different widths. That's why I can't give you a precise measurement. All I can say is that if you're using exactly the same panel as me, which was the Santa Paws panel by Macawa, I think that's available worldwide, I think. Then these are the measurements that I'm working to. And I'm also going to be using my overlocker to neaten the edges, but you can pink the edges with pinking shears. So if you've got some edges, some pinking shears, this is like this with the triangular cuts, you can cut along the edge of your fabric. Let me just show you how that goes, which gives you this zigzag effect on there. And what that is, that makes each of those edges a bias edge, so it might fray a little bit, but it won't fray much, and over time that'll just stop that from everything from fraying away. So that's a good option as well. You can also use a zigzag stitch on your sewing machine as well. That's also a really good option. But if you've got an overlocker as well, you can use an overlocker. So I've got my 2 pieces of fabric here. Just put that on top again. And I'm happy with that because we're going to have a little bit at the bottom there, which will be lost with the seam allowance, and to box that at the bottom. And then at the top here, we want to be able to turn some over to make a hem, to make a nice drawstring. So this is about the excess that I want on mine. So that's on, so there's 2 pieces of fabric here. And then when they're put together on the sides, and this roll will fit in. There isn't enough at the moment, if it was just flat on one piece, to cover all the way round. If you can see, that won't, that's where the end is there. So it won't cover all of it, but because we've got the 2 sides that we're going to sew together, then that will work. Okay, let's move on. So the first thing I'm going to do with this is on the both of the short ends, but working one at a time, is I'm just going to turn over a small amount first, and this is 1 centimetre, which is just under ½ an inch, and then I'm going to press that flat, and then I'm going to turn it over again, and that's just, I can just keep that to 1 inch, and that will probably be enough actually. Yeah, I'm going to turn that over, so 1 centimetre first, and then turn it over another 2½ centimetres, which is 1 inch, and that will then give us a nice thing, nice channel through which to thread some ribbon. So if you just want to do that, so 1/4 inch, 1 centimetre first, then 2½ centimetres, or if you work in inches, 1/4 inch and 1 inch. Both measurements are roughly the same, and we're going to do that on 2 of these short edges. So you're just going to take it to the ironing board and just press that over. We do that now while it's in the flat, before we've joined these side seams, because it can be difficult and tricky to get something inside to press it over once we've started to work with it. So if we just do it now, it gives the fabric that memory, and then when we come to make those folds in the future, you'll see you'll have your crease lines already, and it'll make it much easier for you to work with. Okay, so here we are on the ironing board. Let's turn this over 1 centimetre. I'm just using my seam gauge to be able to help me to do that. And then we just give that a quick press, and cotton fabric you'll find presses really nice. It'll burst of steam if you want to do that. And then we're just going to turn that over again, 2½ centimetres or 1 inch, whichever you're more comfortable working in. Just check it top and bottom, make sure that it's right. And again, we're just going to pop the iron on top of that, and that'll just press that and keep that down for us. Just give it a blow before you move it, just make sure that heat's come out of it first before you then move it, and then we can work on the next one. Go back to the one that we did first off, and when I open this out now, you'll see we've got a lovely crease there for one of the hems, and another lovely crease here. So when we sew it up at the edge here, we'll be able to see what we're doing with that, and that will make a nice edge and make a nice fold. So let's go to the sewing machine. So for some of you that follow me along or have done for a while, then you'll realise that sometimes I kind of change things as I'm going along, and that's what's going to happen here. Because before we get on to sewing our panels together, I'm going to make a little name label for going on to my advent calendar. And I think, so I've got a scrap of white fabric here that I've just used. It's just an off-white. It's just, as you see, it's just a scrap that I've saved. And I've also got a scrap of interfacing. Now this is an iron-on interfacing, and it has a rough side, which is a little glue side. So there's little dots of glue on this side of it. And then on that side, it's got, it's just smooth. And what you do is if you put the underside, so the gluey side onto your fabric, that you don't, the wrong side of your fabric, I mean, this doesn't matter with this one. You can then iron that onto your piece of fabric and it makes it much stiffer. It also helps stop fraying as well a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I am going to choose a section here that I'm going to use as my label. I'm going to get my rotary cutter again and put a smaller ruler here. This one will do. So I'm just going to cut off a piece of fabric that I can use just to make a name tag. So if you don't like this section, you don't have to do that, obviously, but for me it's just all about the personalisation all the time. Get that bit off. I'm just going to take this to the ironing board and just iron that interfacing, because that should be plenty for what I need to do. Just got a thread on there, and I'll show you how this all comes together. So let me just iron this on. Oh, and if you're working with interfacing, use a press cloth if you can. I use this silk organza one, but you can use a fabric handkerchief like linen or a cotton handkerchief, or you can use a pillowcase, or you can use a tea towel. It's just with the silk organza you can see through it, so you can, when I put my interfacing, I can see that it's going to lie straight and flat underneath there, so that's a really good thing. But what that does, let me just press this first. What the press cloth does is it allows you to press a bit dirty in that place, isn't it? But it allows you to see through and to press on without the interfacing sticking onto the bottom of your iron, which obviously is very important. We don't want the interfacing sticking on the bottom of the iron. But what I'm going to do now is I've got a straight edge on this bottom here now. I'm just going to put myself a couple of guidelines. Now I'm going to put Clementine's Advent Calendar. That's my writing that I want to put up. So I'm just going to put a couple of spaces in, and I'm using my Frixion pen, which you can get, I think I've just picked this up from Asda. So it's just a heat erasable pen. It doesn't really say that it's for sewing, but it's got like a little tip on here, and it just says that it's an erasable pen, so you can draw on it with paper, and then you create heat with the friction here with this little rubber top, and it makes the ink disappear. Now you do have to be careful when you're using Frixion pens, because they don't all come out of all fabrics, so you're best to test it on a piece of fabric first. Just put a squiggle on a piece of fabric and then take it to your irons. There's a squiggle, and then if I iron over that with the heat from the iron, then that has pretty much gone. Now it hasn't gone completely. I can still see a little shadow, so I'm going to do a very faint line that I want to follow, but I just want to give myself some guidelines to work towards, and that will then just be careful. The other thing you can use is chalk. If chalk comes out nicely, is the other way. Well, that was too light, Claire. Chalk can come out as well, so you've got to just make sure that's going to come out. And then with my letters, I'm going to use the stamp pad here that I got. And this was from a place called, I think you pronounce it Sostrine Green. It was in the UK when I purchased, but I've used this quite a lot. I do like it. So if I do 1/2 inch between those lines, then I think that will just space out just nicely. So I'm doing three lines. And then I'm going to start and use my ink pad, which the other one I use is this one. I think this company, Crafters Colour Box, has changed names now, but it's just an ink pad suitable for using on fabric as well. Just be aware of your spelling when you're doing this, because obviously it can be easy to forget how to spell things, and I know that sounds really silly, but it's true. So I'm going to put Clementines across the top first, and then that will then give me a starting point to then even up the others for going down here. So I'll just do a little bit and show you how I'm going to do this. So just tab it on the bottom so you get a little bit of, if I put all of the bottom of my letters on that line, CL, to take your time with this section because you can only touch it down once, otherwise you've got to start again. And try not to wiggle it too much forwards and backwards, because it does it will create an outline on your fabric. Hopefully we can get to the end without doing that on ours. And this is when you wish your daughter had chosen a shorter name, but it's a beautiful name, so I'm not complaining. Clem N. Oops, get that back in again. Hear me spelling in my head, can't you? Just make sure you get your letters up the right way round as well, because if you get that out of sync towards the end, you're going to be kicking yourself. I like the scrappy handmade look of this little label. You can obviously write it if you wanted to, or you could embroider it. You could write in a permanent marker if you wanted to make your little sign. Let's use the little apostrophe. Guesstimate where that needs to go. Oops, see I've got a little mark on the edge there. I'm going to carry on and hopefully it'll be okay. Clementines. Okay, so now we can kind of have some idea as to where the middle's going to be, starting to write the next word. It's kind of in the middle, and then I think calendar, C-A-L-E-N-D-A-R, so we've got 8 letters, not 10, so I can just go in a little bit then from that. Nice over an L. Right, see what I mean about spelling things right. Let's see if we can save this. Okay, hopefully we've saved that. So it's E-N, isn't it? Calendar. Work with whatever you're comfortable with in working with this. If you're not happy with a mistake like that, I think I've saved it, but if you're not happy with a mistake like that, then go ahead and start again. I'm wanting to get this one done so that I can get it loaded up so you can all have a look and see what you think. So I'm going to carry on with mine. See, it's around about here that I start to doubt what I'm saying, whether it's calendar or calendar. I'm sure it's calendar. Right, okay, I think that's right. So the next thing that I'm going to do is, oh, no, that doesn't go on there, that goes on there. Cover my ink pad up straight away so that that doesn't dry out. And this one's been really good. I've probably had this one for about 4 or 5 years, and although it's getting a bit flat, it's still working really well. So I'm going to save that like that. The next thing that I'm going to do then is use my pinking shears, and I'm now going to just trim this down to where I'm happy in terms of it being a size. I don't want it to be too big. So this pinking shears just give it a nice little edge that shouldn't fray, and just kind of outlines it. And the reason why we're doing this now is because this needs to go on before we sew our calendar bag together, so that's why I had to jump on and just do this quickly now. I'll just try and match up your zigzags if you can, if you have to take more than one cut, just so that it carries on without a gap. So there we go, Clementine's Advent Calendar. So now all I'm going to do now is just iron it, and hopefully these black lines underneath will go, and that will then set this ink. But that's the little sign that we've made. Obviously you can embroider this if you wanted to. You can do that if you would like. You can do all sorts of things with this. And there we go, the lines have pretty much disappeared. Not quite completely, so that is something just to be aware of. They haven't quite, let's give it a bit of steam, see if that helps. Or maybe I wasn't hot enough. I'll just turn the heat up on my iron, it might have been that. Okay, yeah, that's much better, they've gone out much better. And we've got the interfacing on the back just to make it nice and stiff. So what I'm going to do now on one of my pieces of fabric, put those scraps out of the way. It doesn't really matter whereabouts, so I'm just going to roughly measure to give me a finger pressed halfway mark. Got the bit turned down there, so we know if we do it halfway there and there. I'm going to take a little bit off the bottom, so I'll just probably just move it up a little bit. Right, so that should give me a cross here that I'm going to then mark that up against. What I'm going to do is just pop that on top there and pin it just to hold it in place. So when I'm doing something like this, I generally pin it into the corners. So I'll show you in a second. Let me just get these in. A little rustic, but hopefully it will look nice. And by putting the pins into the centre like this, we don't then get in the way of them when we're trying to sew around it. So that's where we are at the moment. So I've got these pins, each one has got the head into the centre, but then the edges are pointing out towards the corners just to keep those flat for me. And then I'm just going to take a white thread or off-white thread, and I'm just going to just do a quick stitch just all the way round and just back tack at the start and finish just to hold this label down for me. This is why I say to you about these little projects, you can quite often save a little bit of fabric like that you might otherwise have thrown away and not thought it was worthwhile. I mean, it's only a thin strip, but it just came in handy just for that little piece to do. So it is a good idea just to have little scraps like that. If you've not got a scrap bin started already, then it's always a good one. Now I'm going to use the top of the letters as my line up. I'm going to put it onto a straight stitch, but I'm take the length up to 3 because we're going to be doing a top stitching, and I think that looks better. I'm going to hold on to both of my threads so we don't get a nest underneath. A couple of stitches forward, couple of stitches back. Take it nice and steady because we are top stitching, don't try and rush this. And then when we get towards the end, put the needle into your work. One more stitch, I think. So you want to go closest to the edge so that it's there, but not so far that it causes a problem. Just roll your fabric up underneath here so you can keep it straight under the presser foot. And then let's just just go straight down here. And so far my pins aren't getting in the way, so that's good. Well, I probably went a little further than I wanted to then. Let me just go back. So I can take out that pin because that's now anchored down. I can take out that pin because that one's anchored down. So now we're going to try and follow along the bottom of here. Oh, did you hear that then? It just caught my pin. Do try not to do if I can, because it's not good for your machine. And then carry on at the side edge here. So let's take this pin out now before we get there. Lesson learned. I'm just trying to get it to match with where you were, and then a couple of stitches forward and a couple of stitches back. Put the presser foot up. And there we go. Let's just get some scissors to cut our threads. So here we go, we've got our label just signed on. We have got these rough edges here, but they're going to just may fray over time a little bit, but they should sort of sit quite nicely. The other thing we're going to do on the back here is if we just pull the threads up and use our quick unpick to grab the loop underneath, we can pull that thread through to the back and then knot it off. which we like to do to get a nice finish, don't we, and stop those threads from pulling through to the side. And I normally knot it 3 times. So I'm just going to get snipped off. And then with this one, see if we can pull that other thread through. Yes. So if you look on this back front here now, we've got no loose edges, no loose threads there at all. I'm just going to tie this one off 3 times as well. 1, 2, 3, and snip that off. Okay, so now we are ready. Put those bits in the bin. So now I'm happy with that. That's just going to look just lovely on there, and just remind everybody what's inside this. And then we can now get on with joining this together. And as I say, I'm going to use my overlocker for doing the majority of this sewing, apart from round the top. Obviously round the top we'll stitch that nicely, but I can overlock this down the edge, across the bottom, and up the other side with the other piece. So I'm going to put them right sides together. I'm going to have my ironed side at the top, and these are the same size because we measured those, and they were roughly 9 inches, weren't they? Let's just double check. I think I took it down to 8.75 in the end. Yeah, just about 8.75 inches, which is just over 22 centimetres. And then before I folded down the edge didn't really change. That was 29 inches, which is 74 centimetres. That's the same down there. So the next thing I'm going to do now is just take this across to my overlocker. I'm going to unfold the edges here so that I'm keeping those together, but we can see the ironed edges that we've got on there, those creases we put in. I can put some pins in just to hold this together for me. Match top and bottom first, because we know that they were all the same size. Just make sure that's lying nice and flat, and you've got your raw edges together. We go to the middle first, and then we start to put our pins in down the sides to where we're happy to hold those together. That should be enough, I think, for that side. One across the bottom. And turn it over and just pin this to the side. Just hold it together for me just whilst we're working on it. Make sure the raw edges together. Just use your nails just to scrape your fabric down if you need to just move it marginally. Works quite nicely just to manipulate that fabric. And then back up to the top here, making sure that those edges are turned under. Sorry, turned out, not turned under. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to take this to the overlocker, and I'm going to go all the way, can't see where I am. I'm going to take this to the overlocker now, and I'm going to sew down the side, the bottom, and all the way back up to the top again. And I'll meet you back here when I've done that. If you haven't got an overlocker, or you haven't used an overlocker before, what it does is, if you look on the inside of shop bought garments, you'll see that the seam has been stitched and it's been neatened by this thread that goes over the edge of the raw edges of the seam, and the overlocker machine does that all in one go. So it'll trim, because there's a little knife just inside here, it'll trim and neaten and sew the seam all at the same time. They're great for using for knit fabric, so stretched jersey, that type of thing. So if you make a lot of leggings or sweatshirts or t-shirts, it's always good for that. But also when you're sewing with woven fabric, this is what this is called, where there's no stretch in it, then it's really good for neatening the edges. Now with dressmaking, we tend to overlock the edges separately because we want to be able to press those seams open. But just because this is just a quick project, then I'm not going to worry too much, and I'm just going to sew the seam and overlock it at the same time. But if you've not used an overlocker before, then you might not be sure what they do. But they have 4 threads. They don't have a bobbin thread. And as I say, this knife will cut. So you do have to be careful to make sure that you keep the bulk of your work out of the way of the knife, because anything that gets bunched up underneath and gets fed through will get chopped off, which can be a bit disconcerting on your project, believe me. So let's have a go. Quite noisy too. and you definitely don't want to go over your pins through with your overlocker. And we also just check on the back just to make sure that it's all lying nice and flat, and it does look as if it is. Take your pins out the way as you get close. You also think it's one of those tools where you sometimes don't use it very much, but when you do, it's great for the job that you're wanting it to do. So it's one of those kind of things. I know it's a luxury rather than a necessity. You could always use the zigzag stitch on your sewing machine, that would work. Or as I said before, you can use the your pinking shears. Sew your seam with the ordinary sewing machine and then just go over the seam with your pinking shears afterwards, and that would do the same sort of thing. Now, unlike with a sewing machine, when you get to the corner on an overlocker, you just keep going and you what's called chain off. So you take some stitches off the edge of your fabric. And then you can either use the cutter to cut that off, or what I do is, if I'm going to be doing some more later, I just swing it round, lift up my foot, and then just start again in the new direction. Now I'm taking off hardly anything off here because my cutter doesn't work fabulously well on this machine, but for now it works well enough on the stitching that I'm not going to worry. But that's why I'm only taking off these rough edges. If I needed to, I could cut inches off this. The machine overlocker, I'll show you in a minute, will just cut straight through it. Make sure he works nice and flat under what's going on this part here that's going underneath the presser foot. And definitely don't sew over your pins with an overlocker. Just make sure those edges are folded out and together for the end. I'm just going to chain off there and cut through the stitches, and there you can see that's the overlocked edge, how these threads here, these looper stitches, go over the edge of your fabric, and there's no way that's going to fray at all. If you're worried that yours it hasn't got a tight enough tension, this one's fine for what we need it for. Then what you can do is just run another row of stitches with your sewing machine if you needed to, just for absolute belt and braces, but as I say, that's not necessary on this project. So I finished with my overlocker for now, so I'm going to switch that off and just put that out of the way. No, I haven't finished with it, because what I'm going to do is going to box the corners, and I can show you how the overlocker works with boxing the corners. So we've got our bottom edge here with our triangulated edges here. What I'm going to do now is pull the two sides of the fabric apart, and then I'm just going to lie those rows of stitching with feeling with my fingers on top of each other. And if I push one seam allowance one way and one seam allowance the other way, so the seam allowance is going towards the left and the bottom seam allowance is going towards the right, and if we then put a pin across the bottom here, we can what's called box the corner, and this gives it the cylindrical shape rather than it, because at the moment without having the box corner it's just flat, it's just like a sock, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, the calendar's still going to go in there, but what I want to do is just create this little box corner at the bottom of it so that the fabric actually kind of takes the shape that we need to for the end of our advent calendar. So I'm just going to box these. It does take some of your length away, so if you're short on length then don't box your corners, because it does, in creating that, it takes this diameter, this measurement here off the length of your calendar. So we can just make sure, oops, I've got enough room, just make sure that after you've boxed your corners, you've still got room to turn down at the top, and I have on this one, so that's fine. So going back to boxing the corner, pull your two sides of your fabric away from each other, find where your seam allowances are, push one way and one the other so that those seams sort of nestle right up against each other, and then again with our Frixion pen and a ruler, it's this one here, I am going to draw a line on the edge of my pointy bit here. That's a nice technical term, isn't it? Pointy bit. So that the more we take off, we shorten the amount of the bag, but we also make this bottom bit here deeper. So we know that the diameter of ours is about 4.5 inches. So if I do this at 2 inches, that should make it about 4 inches, which will then, I think, will be more than plenty. So I'm going to line one of my lines up with the straight edge of my stitching line. I've got my corner here, just on the edge here of the, I don't know if you can see, you probably can't see that very well, but see the corner on here. So I've got my, so on here I'm using the 3-inch mark for my marking across because it extends over both sides. That measurement across the width there isn't necessarily relevant, but the depth here is, so I've got 1 inch to there and 2 inches to there. And I'm just going to draw a line across here for me to follow with my overlocker because that will chop it as it sews it. So that's what I've got there. Look, that's my pin holding it together, and I'm just going to now put a couple of pins on this side that are going to be out of the way of the overlocker blade, just to hold these edges together for me whilst we sew. And I'm just going to sew along that line just there. And I can show you when I've done that how this makes it look. So just being very careful. So on an overlocker as well, you lift up the toe in order to start stitching. And I want that to be my stitching line. So let's go. Yep, happy with every, oh, seam allowance has gone the other way on that bottom, so that'll be easier. So I'll take that pin out, I think it's going to get in my way. So I've got one seam allowance going forward and one's going back. So as you can see, it cuts off the corner. So if that was the wrong piece that I didn't want cutting off the bottom, you can see how it would just snip straight through it. So you do have to be careful. And at the bottom here, all I'm going to do is I just smooth those threads along, and then I just tie a little knot. I keep saying that a lot, don't I? Tie a little knot, use a little pin, but tie a knot, and then just leave some threads off the edge there. And that'll just neaten that off. And again here, just tie a knot to hold that together. Just to hold those threads in place. Tight as I can to the end of the stitching. Nobody's going to see this bit because it's going to be buried into the bag. So if I just show you the difference. So here we've got the straight edge that we've sewn. And if we actually turn this round, well, we don't need to turn it round, let's just pop our calendar in here. Obviously we need to make sure we have a dress rehearsal and make sure it fits too. So this is like a long sock at the moment for our advent calendar. Oops, got hooked on there. So that all fits in nicely. But if you look here, you've got a long loose baggy edge just there because the actual edge of the calendar hasn't filled that bit. But if we go onto the boxed side, we can see how much neater that is because it just sort of holds it all in together. So that's why I prefer the boxed edge on my bag. But if you're not confident to do this bit, hopefully I've shown you that it's easy to do and how to do it. But if you're not confident in doing that, then you can just leave it that way. There's nothing wrong with that at all. It'll still work as a bag for your advent calendar. So let me just take this advent calendar out now because we're going to mark up the second one. So let's just go over how we did this again. So what we did, we pulled the two sides of our bag apart and straightened it out to the point. I then put one seam allowance one way. I mean, ideally I'd keep it the same way as that so that seam can lie flat. And then the other one is going to go the other way. So the other one is going to go towards the left this time. Gosh, testing my left and right now as well. So we've got a point where our stitching went at the end there, and I can feel my seam allowances are lying flat, so I'm just going to put a pin to hold that steady. Just make sure your sides are out. Then lay it down on your work surface. In this case it's my cutting mat. And then making sure those seams are still on top of each other to make it nice and neat at the end. So we always want to try and get a really nice finish, don't we? Oops. And then we said the amount we want to take off from this point just here where the stitching stops was 2 inches. So I put the 2-inch mark on my ruler at that point. I match the 3-inch line here that's going along with my stitching line to make sure that that's straight, otherwise it'll be skew-if. And then we're just going to mark that stitching line on here. So that's what mine looks like at the end there. Okay. And then I've just then popped a pin here, but well away from where the line is because I don't want it to get in the way of my overlocker. And another one here. And then we're just going to stitch along that line there. So when I put it in, it's just going to be slightly proud of that line because I don't want to cut on that line, I want to stitch on that line. So I need to leave a room for my 1/4 inch seam allowance. So let's just get into doing that again. So I'm going to take this pin out because I don't want that to get in the way. I'm going to line this up by just lifting up the toe of my overlocker. And again, if you're sewing this on the sewing machine, you can, I would do a stitch across first, so sew it across first, and then I would then snip it off with my scissors, leaving at least 1/4 inch seam allowance there, and then you can then use your zigzag stitch to overlock it, to overstitch it, or you could use your pinking shears again. So it's just because we've got the overlocker that I can use this. So let's go. No need to. There's no reverse on an overlocker either. So just guiding this piece so it doesn't get tangled up. And there we go, we take these pins out and then we've got our second box corner. So that's just going to give us a nice boxy edge to the bottom of our bag, if you can see. And if yours isn't as thick as mine, because I've got the ornaments still in there as well, because that's going to store the ornaments for me, then just don't make the depth that you go in from the point quite as much on your ruler, and then you won't take off quite as much here. So you can just do a small amount if you want. You just have to just vary it depending on what you need for your bag. If you want to make one, you might not even like it. That's the thing, is that I keep making what I like and just hope people like it too. So there we go. Anyway, that's the end. So let's turn this round and show you what this looks like from the other side, because that's also quite an important thing, isn't it? So let's turn this round. And let's just push the corners out with our fingers. And we can press this if we want to as well. Oops, 3, and then there's the other one. And there we can see we've got a nice line across the bottom there. Our seams along the side here have then matched up and gone along the bottom here and then followed down the side. And if we put our advent calendar in, again just to show you, before we close up the top and show you how to neaten that all off. Oops. And calendar, you know you want to go in and be packed away ready for Christmas. And there we go. So that's got a nice boxy end to the bottom of the advent calendar there. Put our label on. So we've got all that all nice and neat. And then the next stage then, all we need to do now is just to look at neatening off this top edge. Now I'm going to take off these overlocked threads here, because we don't need those on, because we're going to turn up this bottom edge. And if we remember, I said you could see where your folds are, so we can see that folds really nicely under there and then onto there again, and we can just put our pin in from this side just to hold that down. So now that I've shown it in and out, this advent calendar, get it up there out of the way. So all I'm doing is folding over that edge, reinstating that turned edge, and it just goes under really nicely, as I say, because we've pressed it. Actually, if I stitch it, if I pins in, because we're going to sew it from the top, aren't we? No, I'll sew it from this side because then that'll be easier to see. Just trying to think on my feet. When there's no pattern for something, you're having to make it up as you go along. And you could use this pattern this way really of making bottle bags if you wanted to for gifts for friends and family, rather than going out and buying one. You could make a reusable gift bag like this, and you can experiment with the size and the length and the diameter. You could label them up as well, couldn't you, so that you've got your labels on the front if you wanted to. Just lie that seam allowance the right way. Let's go that way. You don't get a crossover underneath. And a pin just to hold that steady. Okay, so all that we need to do now is leave in a little gap here so that we can thread our ribbon through. We're just going to then just go along here and just sew along here. The other thing that I might do is just sew along the top edge as well, just so that when it gathers up, it's got a nice little top edge to it. So let me go to my sewing machine and get my sewing machine threaded up with the red thread, and then I'll get that done. So here we go with the red thread. I'm just going to start a little way in from the edge of the bag here. I'm going to change my needle position so that I'm right over to the left here, because that'll give me a nice neat edge here. And I'm going to just extend my stitch length to 3, because we're top stitching really, aren't we? And I'm just going to follow along the edge of the top here, hold on to my thread so get a nice neat finish. A couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back, and then I'm just following, so I've put my needle in my work so it holds it still. I'm just following this difference here between the metal and the plastic on my presser foot. You'll find a place on yours, or you can line it up this side with a mark on your presser foot, on your machine bed, and be able to follow that too. So just pull the other bit out, the bit you're not working on, out of the way, and just concentrate on working on a couple of inches in front of your presser foot at a time. And stop, and then because we've got the needle in the work, that anchors it down while we take our pin out. And then we can then just roll the fabric just slightly more towards. You don't have to go all the way, don't go tugging at it, but just a couple of inches across, and that'll be enough for you to work on. And just stop, and then just roll it slightly more towards you. Stop enough to take out your pins. This side I'm just going to carry straight on through. Take my time over the lump, and if it needs a little bit of help at the back, just give it a little tug. Not too hard, but just put a little bit of pressure on it. Should come through for you. Just keep rolling it round forward towards you. So you've got a nice flat bit in front. Just be careful there, and we've got to leave that gap, don't forget as well, to feed our ribbon through. So to about there I think, and then reverse, and forward. Take our threads out, snip those off, close to our work, so that's nice and neat. Oops. Okay, so there we've got our nice, I can't see it very well on here because it's a very nicely matching thread, but a nice stitch along there. And I'm just going to do that top edge as well. I think it'll just finish it off, but this time I'm just going to go all the way around. I'm not going to leave a gap, but I'll start and stop roughly in the same place. So let's move my needle again. So let's take it back to the number 1, and then I'm going to move it right across, if you can see it jumping across. So you might have this facility on your machine as well. And it does work nicely. And I'm going to line it up this side. So a couple of stitches forward. Oh, not turn my stitch length up to number 3. And then I'm just going to take it nice and steady. Just keeping my needle in my work, and then the edge of my work, the fabric with the edge of the presser foot there. Just go as slow as you need to. This is top stitching, so it is important to keep it nice and neat. Just keep rolling your fabric towards you. Stop every so often. Much easier without the pins in to stab you as you go in. Keep your threads out the way so they don't get tangled up. Start a couple of stitches back, and the needle up, and we'll just take those threads off. Pop this in the bin. Okay, so this is where we're at the moment. We've got a row of stitches across the top and a row of stitches across the bottom. Let's have a look in my ribbon bag and see what we've got that might suit this bag. You might have gone and chosen something specifically to match, but I'm going to use my ribbons to see what I've got. So hold on one second. Let's switch my machine off because we're finished with that now. So I've got, oh, I can see one that might do the trick. So I use that, I collect ribbons. Oh, that's got a bow on it already, that's a shame, isn't it? Oh, that one might be nice though. So I've got a bag of ribbons here that I've collected over the years. Sometimes they're handles off cardboard carrier bags. This was an old belt off a jumper that I had. These are from lingerie tags, when you have a lingerie, you know, like a bra, and sometimes you have a nice little ribbon hanging on from a lingerie tab. This one was for some perfume that I bought. So there's all sorts of things that you can use and save. That one might look nice actually. It's a bit big, but it's got the red on it, hasn't it? It's got the red and the gold on it, but it's got black on it too. So sorry, digressing. So I save them all, and sometimes they're things like this that have just gone round, a bedding set or some pyjamas or something. But they're really handy just to hold on to and just to keep, because you never know when you might need just a small amount of ribbon. And this project's exactly that. So I can see here where it's been stitched onto something else, but we don't need that. And it's got a Velcro closure on it, which isn't necessary, but I suppose we can just stick with that. And so all I'm going to do now is get a safety pin, once you've chosen. And in this ribbon, if you wanted yours to be the same, sometimes that's nice to know, isn't it? So it's just under 1 inch thick, that ribbon is. And it's going to go through our channel here, and it should go through okay. It might be a little bit tight, but because the ribbon is flexible, we should be okay. So I choose a nice big safety pin for this job because we've got a nice wide channel to pop it through. I'm going to put the loops through because I think that won't tag onto the fabric so much. Put a pin through the ribbon. Yours will be a bit easier because I'm going through a velcroed end. Let's find our opening, which was here, and then we poke the end of the safety pin up, and then we push it along. So we push the pin along and bunch the fabric up over the top of the pin, like that. And then we just hold on to it with this hand and then pull on the other hand, and that ribbon just starts to disappear inside our channel. So again, just popping that through and then pull on the end, and it just pulls through the channel. And we're just going to go right the way around. You might have done this before, but some people might not have ever had to thread something through. So again, just pull it through and just help ease your ribbon in. It'll start to bunch up a little bit. We're hoping to get round to the other side where the hole is, and then we're going to poke back out through the hole with a pin. As I say, it's a little bit thick because I got that velcroed end on the end of my ribbon still. I might not need all of this ribbon. And what we want is for the ribbon to lie flat in the channel, and we hopefully don't have any twists in it. So you can normally feel with your fingers if you're happy with how it's lying. Might have a twist there. It just might be just how it's lying. Just manipulate your ribbon anyway until you're happy with it and until it's lying how you want it to. I think there was a twist in there, but I've just got that out. And then you want enough sort of to hang over the edge and to be able to tie. I'm going to tie a knot with mine, I think. I'm going to take that Velcro edge off because I think it's just going to get in the way, and just tie a knot with it. So put the needle away. So if I trim this off at an angle, this one off, and then trim the other one off. I'm going to put those two ends together, make sure they don't disappear into your bag while you're trying to work with it. Slide those on top of each other and tighten a nice little knot. Doesn't have to be too fancy, it's more of a practical bag anyway, but you could tie yours into a bow or what have you. I've just got some of my trusty fray check here, so I'm going to put some of this on the edge. This is Prim Fray Check. And all it does is it just puts a like a glued edge, if it'll come out, onto the edge of the ribbon. It does discolour it slightly, but it will just stop that from fraying a little bit. So just put that on the edge there. So just keep it away from your fabric for a bit, because if you get that on anything, it will stain it. Let that dry for a moment or two. Velcroed ends I might put those back into my bits bag. Save that for another day. As I say, really handy. I'm all for keeping down the cost if we can do, and just saving things and using what we can and make things last for a long time. Just make sure that's drying nicely. Watch out if you do get it on your fingers, because you don't want it to get it on anything else. Just make sure it's nice and dry. Okay, so then we have a nice bag that will open out. So the knot stops the ribbons from disappearing inside. And I can get our advent calendar. My fingers are dry, so don't worry folks. And then I'm just going to re-roll this a little bit more so that it's a little just nice and ready for going in. Tuck one end in, all the way down to the bottom. Loose threads everywhere. And then I'm just going to pull on the tie string end there, drawstring end, and there we go. We have our nice little bag for our advent calendar. So I hope you've enjoyed seeing this little bonus project with this boxed end. I hope it's given you some ideas as to what you might be able to use your bag for. Let me just tilt the camera up so I can see you. So as I said, I hope you've enjoyed seeing this little project. I think now that I'm really happy. I really have finished now with this advent calendar. I know that it seems to be the project that doesn't seem to go away, and it has taken a long time to do, but I think that that's made a really good addition now to this project, and it will just keep that nice and neat and protect it for many years to come. And Clementine can be gifted that when she's old enough in order to play with it. So I hope you've had a good time today watching the channel. I hope you've enjoyed my tutorial. If you have, please consider subscribing. I was having a look the other day. Apparently over 67% of people who watch my channel aren't subscribers, and I know that it is only a small thing, but it really does help my channel grow, because the more interaction I have from people who enjoy my videos, then the more YouTube thinks that it's content that will suit other people, so it will pop it out to other people as suggested videos. So it really does help me grow, and I appreciate knowing you're there as well. So leave me a comment if you like the project. Leave me a comment if you think you're going to make some bottle bags, because as I say, if you put a bottle of wine in there, obviously you won't make it quite as long, but you could do the same thing and that would make a nice little gift with a little label. Lots of things you can do anyway with all of this. So have a great day everybody, happy stitching, thank you for coming along to see me, and I'll see you all soon. Take care, bye.